Disclaimer: this show is not for the faint of heart or the easily offended. The views expressed here are that of the show hosts only, and not their wives, girlfriends, husbands, boyfriends, polygamous partners, employers, music artists, businesses, or anyone other than the Cognitive Dissolutions podcasters. The explicit tag is there for a good reason. Please proceed with caution.
Every one of us will have to decide whether or not we want to keep this great republic or whether we're willing to sacrifice it and surrender it to tyranny.
Ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Cognitive Dissolutions podcast, where we address the current issues of today with brash humor, skepticism, or aggression to invoke critical thinking in the masses. We take our tightly held beliefs, everyone's tightly held beliefs, mash them up with current events, politics, and religion, then throw them to the fires of skepticism. We magnify the so-called logic, then blow it all up. There is no green zone of safety for a lack of critical thinking. This is episode number 14. Your hosts today are John, Joel, and I'm Al, and we are your tormentors. How are you both doing today?
I'm good. How you doing?
Good. Joel?
I am doing okay, enjoying life, enjoying the sunshine.
Yeah, it's pretty fucking beautiful out today.
Oh, man. Was that 75 and just nice or something like that?
Yeah, that's approximately what it was here. How about you, John? How's it up there in no man's land?
It's decent. I did a lot of driving yesterday, so I'm just glad to not have to go places today.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I actually got a really cool opportunity today. My brother Noah, his wife Haiti, she did a little art show display today in downtown Vancouver, which was really cool. She was displaying some of her art and some of her, I forget how to describe them. She makes dragon eggs and little fairies out of, I want to say it's ceramic, but I'm probably really wrong on that. So she was at the Love Potion Magic Perfume and Gift Shop down in Vancouver, and doing the whole display thing. So I took the kids. The kids were really excited when I told them that she was going to be there doing that kind of stuff, and my daughter was really excited. She's into art, so that was a cool opportunity to do today.
Awesome. Hey, also, thank you so much for the invite. I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, because I got it at 1:30 in the afternoon from my brother, and he's like, "Oh, hey, if you want to come down, this is the information." I was like, "Oh, cool. When is it?" "Oh, 5 o'clock today." Oh.
One of those.
Thanks for the warning.
Yeah. My uncle's that way. It drives me nuts.
No, it's cool. It's one of those. I'm sure they've been busy the past couple of days. We were up at their house yesterday. I took the kids up there to spend some time up there and at their place, and they were so busy with what they had going on that it didn't even occur to them, I think, to let anybody know. So, yeah. Anything else going on?
No. Not for me. Still recording our EP for the band. So.
And we're gonna get first dibs on advertising that bitch, right?
Oh yeah, we might even get the whole band on.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, but are you gonna get a consolation prize just for showing up?
Well, that's actually that is a great bridgeway to the first topic here.
It's so organic.
Yeah, it was well done, John. Thank you for that bridge. It was excellent. As opposed to some of the other ones you've thrown at us, like rape.
you know, and like you grab a woman's breast and you feel it and it feels like a bag of sand.
Grape?
But
I didn't. Wait. You want a grape?
yes, a grape.
Like the one in my mouth?
Sure.
No.
Giggity giggity. So, a
Grape nuts.
former drill sergeant, John Burke, he's got his own Facebook page, and I'll put the links in there. He did a video that's been going around, and it's been dubbed essentially the Army Pussies video. And he's not saying that the Army is pussies. He's saying that he was doing the video in response to the fact that there was an engineering basic training battalion that was giving out shoulder patches after the soldiers in training. The recruits completed what's called red phase, and that's about 3 weeks into basic training, and gave them shoulder patches, and he compared it essentially to, like, you know, a Boy Scout patch. I thought that there was some history with this, but I can't find any verification that any other place has done this before, and I thought I had, so I might be mistaken on that. Do either of you have an opinion on that so far?
I have an opinion. I have no information, but
You didn't watch the video?
I did watch the video.
No. This is more of an emotional or psychological or intellectual response kind of to watching his video and our impressions of it.
Well, the biggest question that I would have is, are these kids taking these patches to their units after they graduate from boot camp? Because if you're, I mean, I get the idea of getting a patch for accomplishing something, getting a reward for an accomplishment. I get that. But if the only real accomplishment is assimilating into military lifestyle, you know, okay, I get it. Within the boundaries of that schoolhouse, I can see where that would be valuable, where one teacher can see that, you know, readily, right away, hey, this guy's completed this part of the schooling. But if they're wearing them after they leave the schoolhouse, you know, if they're wearing them like a combat patch, that really devalues what the combat patch is supposed to mean. It's supposed to be an indicator that you've been overseas and you've been in the theater of battle. Doesn't necessarily mean you've seen battle. That's what a combat action badge is for. But it shows that you went and that you were there. Seems like this sort of thing just says that you went to boot camp, which if you're in the military, you went to boot camp.
I think this is okay to say. I'm the lone civilian, or at least lone all of my life civilian in this group here, and I kind of the first thing that pops into my mind is like being in high school and getting your Letterman jacket in interpretive dance or something like that. Would that be an apt comparison? Like, would you wear that around? You've got your interpretive dance letter.
No, what I think the intent of this was, not of Mr. Burke's video, but of the patch, was to identify them as being trainees. Because as far as I've been able to see and been able to tell, the patches aren't actually full unit patches. They're basic training patches, sort of like the patch that I was given for AIT. You only wore it when you were on base at AIT, and it identified that you were a trainee of this particular battery at this particular time and location. Because the other batteries and the other training cycles had different patches, so that if you were walking through, a section chief could go, hey, you're with fucking Sergeant so-and-so, get your ass over there, or they would know if you fucked up who to send the information to and who to contact. That's really all that was. As far as I can tell, that's what this is showing. They're not actually getting full unit patches. They're just getting training ID patches. Granted, I disagree with that. I don't think they should be allowed to have those, because really the basic training you're not a soldier yet. And the biggest thing at the time was, at least the time when I went through and the time before that was, when you completed basic rifle marksmanship, you got to put a cover over your Kevlar helmet. And that was the big deal. That gave you the distinction between somebody who is just in to somebody who is most of the way through. And that should be the only distinction, I think.
Well, in watching the video, it seemed to me that however he interpreted this, it was more of a straw that broke the camel's back scenario, because it sounded as though he was frustrated with the leniency that is apparently a big part of military life and training now that didn't exist before. Would that be a fair statement to say?
I think I get that from him as well, and I don't think that General Patton would disagree. However, we do live in a different time. I mean, when I was deployed, literally maybe 1% of the people that went over there even knew what combat looked like. 1% might have fired their weapon in defense or aggression. The field of battle has changed. We're mainly an electronic army these days. The only boots on the ground are people kicking in doors and doing convoys. I mean, during the Iraq theater, that was pretty much the mission. The 99 other percent were the ones who stayed behind and, manned the kitchen and did all the command and control stuff. And if that's what we're training our troops for, then the leniency is, I do have a problem with it, because everybody is a rifleman. Everybody should be prepared for that sort of thing. But if it's not necessary, then it's not necessary. Save it for AIT, But yeah, in boot camp, I kind of tend to agree with the guy. It should stay kind of rough and tumble.
Well, I fully agree with his viewpoint when it comes to basic training. That the whole point of basic combat training is training you to survive in combat. Your AIT, your advanced individual training, is meant to set you up to learn how to do the job you're going to do in the Army, whether it's artillery or infantry or, supply or whatever, medic, And basic combat training is supposed to turn you from a high school kid or an adult who, joined later into a trained soldier, or a sailor or a Marine or an airman. It's meant to prepare you for the trials and tribulations that you're going to face in combat. And this lessening of things is not productive. It's counterproductive, and he's right. It's going to cause people to have harm, get their buddies killed.
Well, what about this? What about this comparison he made? I'm curious to hear what your guys' thoughts on whether or not you think this correlates. He made a comparison, or a correlation, maybe I should say, between not having tough enough standards, and I don't know a better way to say that, having never been through it, but not having tough enough standards in boot camp and pushing people and finding out who can do it and who can't earlier in the game, and making that correlation to more suicides in, by military veterans, because they weren't able to handle it. I don't know how many people in general can handle some of the stuff that people have seen in war, but do you think there's a correlation between lower standards, so to speak, or at least not as tough of a basic training, and being so ill prepared to deal with the realities of war that suicide is more prevalent?
I really don't know. I'm sure
that's probably the right answer. But
He would be more apt to know those kinds of things than I, because I really didn't keep track of the correlations between this and that and that and this. Every generation who goes through basic training says the generation after them or the next group after them had it easier and were pussies. And every generation before them had it harder.
Is it true on some level, do you think?
I think it really depends
perception?
I think it really depends on a couple of factors. One, how squared away the people that are going through are when they go through, the age that they are, and also depending on the military specialty you're getting funneled through. If you're going through infantry training or cavalry training, which is 14 and 16 weeks long, you're going to get a harder time through than somebody who's going to be, say a truck driver or a mechanic.
Well, presumably the people probably more likely to kill themselves after combat are the ones that have been in combat. So
that's not necessarily true.
Okay, well, I think that I don't think it's. I'm not going to commit even close to 100%, but I think it would be more likely than, like you say, somebody who's driving a truck or cooking
truck
up
drivers,
meals
cooks, and all that were ambushed as well. So it's not
I know
like,
that. I have to speak in generalities, and I have to speak from a place of ignorance. So if you're correcting me that there's no correlation between actual combat soldiers and suicide, I would accept that. But
I'm not, because
Okay.
I really don't know. I'm not making that claim. John, what's your input on this? You have more years of experience than I do.
I've been to some of those classes, the resiliency classes, and yes, there is a correlation. People need to have a tough personality in order to survive the rigors of real life. Those lessons are not being taught in schools. In many cases, they're not being taught at home. Home is really not the place for that sort of thing to be taught. Parents should not be tough on their kids. But teachers, in a big way, should be tough on kids because it teaches that resiliency. It teaches them that you're not always going to win, that when you learn your best lessons, you learn them because you failed at something. Thomas Edison said it best when he said, I didn't fail at making a light bulb 1,000 times. I just learned 999 ways not to make a light bulb. That's the kind of resiliency that we're talking about. You learn your best lessons by failing. When you succeed at something, you learn a little bit of a lesson, but all you really get out of it is a reward. But when you fail at something, there's embarrassment, there might be other types of pain involved, and those types of things are more impressive, especially at a young age, which is why, again, parents need to be kind of soft with their kids, because there's got to be a balance between tough and soft. In boot camp, it's completely different. There has to be pain. There has to be discomfort. The rewards that are given have to be the lowest common denominator, because when you get out in the field, it doesn't, you might be infantry or you might be commo. You might have, you might be in a tent with a generator the whole time, or you might be out in the dust sleeping literally on the ground. You don't know. Neither does the guy at boot camp. So everything is lowered to the lowest common denominator so that when guys get out in the field or get into their unit, they're not surprised, and the pain in their unit is not as high as it would otherwise have been. A lot of people, when they come out of boot camp, they're supposed to feel like when they go to their next school, to their AIT, that it's a reward, that things are nicer in the next level. And then they go to the next level and things are supposed to be nicer. When you get to your unit, things are supposed to be super nice. You're supposed to be, you got all this freedom. You just spent 8 weeks in boot camp and 8 or 16 weeks in AIT. You're almost 3 months into 6 months. You're pushing 5 to 6 months being in the military, and for all that time you've been on lockdown. There's been a lot of pain. You haven't had any freedom. Then you get to your unit, and your unit is awesome because you've got all this freedom. Not really, because you're still under somebody's thumb. You're still being controlled a lot. It's just the person is going to view it differently because they've lived the last 6 months in this awful, awful place. If that place is not so awful, then they're going to have a terrible time when they get to their unit. They're just going to give nothing but trouble. They're going to be, I want to go out to the club. I want to use my cell phone. They're going to be, missing their parents, missing their girlfriends, and that separation is much easier when boot camp is hard. Now, Joel, you mentioned before about generation gaps. Those generation gaps do exist, but it's particularly painful now based on what's going on in society.
I was just going to bring that up. Thank you, because there's obviously a socioeconomic correlation to some of this. We have a shrinking middle class now, and you've got more people desperate to try and find a place in life or get money to pay for college or so on and so forth. We've got more poor people is what I guess I'm trying to say, that look to the military as being a way out, rightfully or wrongfully. I don't know. And Al had said earlier about, are the people coming in squared away? And I would tend to think that fewer people, I should say, are squared away in general, and that's what we're getting right now. You combine that with all these other things about everybody gets a trophy, and I think this is what you get.
In World War II, in the 1940s, the people that were joining the military were coming out of the Great Depression. The trophy that they got was a meal. The trophy they got was a roof over their head. You look at people today, and they seem quite soft by comparison. Even just looking at Vietnam, people who are being drafted in Vietnam had many of the same problems that we have today. They were maybe middle class, maybe lower class, but still the level of comfort at home growing up was much higher than it was during the Great Depression. This is why the generation gap was so painful in the 1950s, and why the Korean War was so controversial. The Korean War wasn't so controversial because of the politics involved. It was more controversial in the underground, in the military itself, not in Congress. I know in Congress, the politics were pretty important, but in the military itself, during the Korean War, the biggest conflict was between the World War II generation and the new troops, because the new troops just didn't understand. They lived the war from home, and now they're going to war, but they didn't have the benefit of the Great Depression to teach them what it felt like not to have. And again, in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and now in the 2000s, you've got this growing gap between the people that we call the greatest generation, who really honestly grew up eating shit, and they were really fighting for their lives. And now you've got people who think that, being at home, having a cell phone, having a 16-inch plasma screen, having cable, having internet, having all these perks, and then they think they had a shitty childhood. They had a roof over their heads. They weren't living in a shack in a Hooverville. They're living in apartments. Even the lowest class people today, as long as they're in the socioeconomic spectrum, I'm not talking about homeless folk, I'm talking about people in the lower echelon of the economy, even they have more perks than the average person in the middle class back in the 1930s during the Great Depression. So you can definitely see that there's a difference. And when you get those, again, I hate to use the word, but I kind of have to at this point, when you get those privileged kids today coming out of their childhoods and joining boot camp and expecting a reward for, doing 40 push-ups. Really, that's the standard. Come on, if you're going to give awards for doing standards, let's make the award, what it's always been, graduation. Crickets.
Well, I think that what we have today, and I certainly don't exclude myself from this, is we have different motivating factors now than we ever have. All of our motivating factors seem to come externally rather than in your guts and in your heart, where they're actually meaningful and can actually get you through the tough times. And I certainly see where you're coming from. I can also see that every single one of us is completely overwhelmed by a media system that tells us all these things that we need to have that we don't need to have. And this bar is set to constantly crave more and more and have some constant direction of upward mobility with our possessions and our other external influences. And I think all of these things tie into the attitude that we see today. Go ahead.
Part of it, and this may be a very biased viewpoint because it's coming from me.
I would hope your viewpoint is biased.
Well, it's the fact that I don't know about John's background in this regard, or yours in this regard, because we haven't really touched on it, I don't believe. You and I, Joel, I think, have vaguely, but not really. I was raised in what some may call the warrior caste, the warrior class. My whole family, military. So it was kind of expected that that's where I was going to go. In great despair, I think, to my mother. She wanted a doctor or a lawyer. Unfortunately, she didn't get that. But I was raised, for the military. I was headed that path. That's where I knew I was supposed to go, what I was supposed to do. Military, police, fire, service. That's what's going to happen. So my father was very proactive in teaching the life skills, and so was my mother in the arts and languages and things like that. So, granted, I was from the poorer classes. I was headed that direction. So I don't know how many people in America have that kind of background, have that kind of, this is where you need to go. This is what you need to do. You are going to have to survive somehow. Both my parents, though, were born in the Great Depression at the end of World War II. So they lived through that. So maybe that's the perspective that I got from them, being born in there and my dad serving in Nam. So he had those different viewpoints.
Yeah, I do think that perspective is, or it's likely that lifestyle is not as prevalent as it used to be. That's been my experience.
Well, in a big way, do you guys remember? Oh, you probably don't, but there was a time when judges would give, there were some types of criminals that a judge would give them an option: join the military or go to jail.
Yeah, I remember that. There were a couple of guys in my infantry training brigade that went through that.
Yeah, and I have not met one of those in several, I'm going to say at least 2 decades. I knew one when I was in the Navy. That was a long time.
There's a reason for that. It's because prisoners are profitable.
Well, prisoners are profitable, and the majority of criminals these days are involved with drugs, and of course you can't have drugs in the military. But anyway, the notion that the military involves any kind of corrective, behavioral corrective measures is very dependent on how difficult it is. It has to be difficult enough to teach those lessons, but not so difficult that people become defiant against those life lessons. So I think that softening the military is going to cost lives.
Yeah.
I think it already has in a lot of ways. I don't think that I don't remember her name, but that young lady back in 2004, 2005 who was taken prisoner, and she was a prisoner for like 6 months. She got sodomized. She was raped every day, and she got rescued some 6 months later. Just had an awful, awful life. Her level of resilience was so high. I can't even imagine what she went through. I can't imagine how she didn't have thoughts of, bad thoughts when she got back. I'd expect that her impression on life and on the universe was very low. That's the kind of resilience that needs to be taught in the military. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that aren't getting that. I don't know where that young lady got that, but wherever she got that training from, that's a very resilient person.
Her name was Jessica Lynch, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
Jessica Lynch.
Yep.
She did not strike me as the best soldier in the world, but at the same time, I have the utmost respect for her level of resilience. If I'm not, am I correct?
Alive.
I was going to say she lived through it and she got through the hard times. I was pretty sure she was still alive today. So I mean that shows an amazing level of again resilience. That's the word the military uses. It's stick-to-itiveness. It's perseverance. It's my life sucks, but you know what? I'm going to push through it anyway because I got stuff I got to do. Whatever that stuff is.
That's where the phrase in the military that I absolutely abhor anymore is embrace the suck. I really can't stand that phrase.
Well, I hope I'm offering a unique perspective rather than an ignorant one, again, having never served in the military, but it seems to me, on the face of it, that people that are complaining about how tough the military is don't understand why it needs to be tough. They really don't understand that it's tough now so that you survive later. They don't want to see past their nose. They don't want to see past the moment.
And they can't know that. And how can we expect them to when if
we're not telling them? Yeah.
Well, on the same level, I know that you two are somewhat liberal, so don't be offended by this. But we've got people in the world who are saying ISIS needs to be understood. That they're just misunderstood.
I don't support that in any way, shape, or form as a liberal. That's a regressive liberal stance, and I cannot stand it.
No, I agree with that statement up until the point where you're understanding how to kill them.
Yeah, exactly.
Know your enemy.
Oh, well, yes. I didn't take John's statement in that fashion. I think he was referring more to the cultural relativist argument.
Yeah.
That we can't condemn their actions because we're not in their culture. So how can we possibly have anything to say about their behavior?
Marrying teenagers and raping people that they don't like and cutting off heads. Yeah, actually we can judge them on that. Yeah. We can judge that it's not good for us, and by the way, you're doing it to people that we like and that we support. So I mean, where does diplomacy end and the aggression begin? I mean, there is a purpose for aggression, and the military teaches that. The military teaches you that there is a point at which violence is not only acceptable; it's to be expected.
It's necessary. I mean, it's moral. Well, I struggle with that too. I personally,
and we don't teach our kids this either. I was listening to some conservative. It's some conservative radio talk show on my way to school. One of during this last week, and the fella mentioned something about teaching your kids when violence is acceptable. And I totally understood and support what this guy had to say. That there's a point at which even children need to know that you gotta use violence. Like when a stranger approaches you and he's being a creepy old man or he's being a creepy old woman and they're trying to kidnap you. You know what? You don't need to just lay down and not be violent. There are certain times when you got to kick a guy in the balls and run away.
Yeah,
I totally
and
support that.
I do too, and that's something I teach both of my kids. Is there's a level where you have to step up, you have to fight, and you know, if you're going to fight, you better fight to win or fight to survive. One of the two. You know, and I see a great concern, but in regards to the military tie-in here, there's also something that I think we're missing here. And this is going to sound extremely sexist, and Joel's going to call me on it. But it's the current integration of women into more of the service. Now, I fully support
Al's
that.
a sexist.
He says that right after I say I fully support that. The irony right there.
Yeah.
But it's the growing pains of how do we integrate women from our culture, the United States culture that's very, very liberal at this point, very, very open, very, very accepting, into a society and a culture of the military that's very much, hey, you don't get this freedom. I don't give a shit. Go out and do your fucking job. And a lot of the young ladies these days, a lot of young men these days, aren't taught that. They aren't taught the hard day's work, the hard day's labor. I don't give a shit if you're 12, you're going to go out and mow the fucking lawn. I don't care if it's 90 degrees out, the lawn has to get done. I'll help you do it, but it's got to get done kind of thing. And you've got a lot of these kids that go, well, I'm just going to sit down, play on my video games, sit inside. I'm not going to do this work. That work builds character, it builds a skill set, it builds a confidence that other kids aren't going to have. Same thing with the military is the growing pains of incorporating women into what's considered been a long time, at least in our culture, a male-dominated environment and a violent male-dominated environment. So we're missing some of that connection and how that's tying together with the lowering of certain standards and such.
The concern I have about that is that it seems to me that there's also a culture within the military system of crossing that line between strict and abuse, and there not being, historically haven't been a lot of avenues to deal with that in any kind of meaningful way. And so I feel like two things would need to happen. A, people need to expect that military life is going to be difficult, and B, the other prong of this would be those people that are in leadership roles are held to an incredibly high standard, and if they get out of line and they abuse their powers in all the ways that you can imagine one would, they need to be dealt with.
Well, military leadership nowadays, depending on how high you go up, goes away from a military combat role and more into politics, and that's where part of this issue is. The other part is going back to the abuse idea versus discipline. I'm of two minds of the concept because, yeah, there shouldn't be quote-unquote abuses, but you're being prepared for an enemy who will abuse the shit out of you if they catch you and let you live.
I get it. It is a very fine line. I imagine it would be, but it should be pretty clear. It should be thought out.
It's very clear, and to give drill sergeants and drill instructors credit, they know where that fucking line is. The leadership in the unit that I was in knew the fucking lines on where they could and couldn't push. And they were very well trained, at least in my opinion, and the ones that I got experience with, they knew where those lines were, and I hadn't ever had one cross one with me, or with any other troop that I know of.
Well, the reason why I bring that up is because you had mentioned more of an influx of female soldiers, that's where I would start to have some concerns on that level, because
Well,
we can't.
I
You see where
really
I'm going
don't,
with that?
because I do see where you perceive it may go.
I'm making some assumptions here.
Yeah, there
I
are a
have
lot
to.
of assumptions there, and that's fair on a part of somebody who hasn't been in. But there are a lot of female drill sergeants, a lot of female drill instructors in the Marine Corps and the other branches. Granted, I'm Army, or was Army. So there are plenty of sergeants, and they are seasoned, well trained, and they know where those lines are. The issue isn't with them. It's way, way above them that's causing the problem. And it's the new troops that are coming in, new recruits that are going, I deserve this, I deserve that. You don't deserve dick. The world doesn't owe you shit. Period. Especially not a military world.
I would agree with that sentiment, and I agree with that sentiment for one reason, and that's because I genuinely believe it saves lives.
John, what's your input there, John?
I don't know. You guys covered an awful lot.
That's true.
I don't have any problem with women. I mean, if the Vikings taught me anything, it taught me that women can fight just as well, and in many cases better than men. I mean, let's face it, a woman, if you've never seen how a woman shoots, I guess you wouldn't really understand, but I've detected a very keen difference between men and women shooters. Women shooters tend to really suck because they don't have the experience. But once they've got the experience, a woman who's handled a rifle as many hours as a man has is going to shoot much better than him. In general, women have more patience. They have more finesse. They're taught grace at a young age, and that's what it takes to shoot well. It takes grace. It takes patience. You need to aim, and that consistency is one of the hallmarks of a good shooter. So when it comes to performance, I think that there are some big differences between men and women, and that women should be in the combat arena. On the other hand, there are some arguments against women as well. And I get those. I understand them. I think that women belong in the military. I think that women need to be in combat. Israel has taught me that. Women in combat do not change factors at all. As far as human interactions are concerned and the problems with having lovers on the battlefield, I get it. You're going to lose that disconnection that you need to have. There needs to be a connection between a man and his battle buddy, but there needs to be a disconnect as well. There needs to be that ability to let go, and lovers have a tendency to not be able to do that. But of course, you're going to have that problem with gay couples as well. So I really don't think that it's an issue. I think that women belong in the military. They belong in combat arms. They need to be there. We need to, I'm not going to say suck it up, but we need to adjust our culture away from the regressive, Victorian women belong in the kitchen, 1950s type of post-Victorian, feelings on women. We need to get rid of that stuff. Women are just as strong as men. We need to teach them to be just as strong as men at the youngest possible age. That's where they learn to live alone. That's where they learn to be individual units, and we need to be taught that. I mean, we're seeing in society today a lot of single mothers are learning those lessons. They're learning them the hard way, and it's a really hard life, and they're just having a really hard time with it. Well, if they were taught to be strong as children and independent as children and how to manage themselves as children, then they wouldn't be having this difficult life. It would just be life. It would just be, okay, I can get through this. I can teach a kid and work a job at the same time. I can go to school too. I can do this. I can. And that's the attitude that comes out of the military because it's so difficult. As soon as you start giving rewards for the little things, a reward should be 10 minutes on the cell phone, 10 minutes on the pay phone, whatever the case may be. I just don't think that using, bringing us all back to where we were in the beginning, I don't think that giving what looks like and acts like and feels like a combat patch for completing a basic part of basic training, I don't think that's appropriate. Something else, something different, something that doesn't look, feel, and act like something you can only get from proving yourself in the actual battle. There was a set of memes that I saw on Facebook a little while back of a mother who called, who contacted this Facebook veterans group and said, my son just got to his unit and he doesn't have a combat patch and he feels very oppressed. He feels very. I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah, is that true? I don't know if that was true.
I don't know if it's true or not.
That's from the 5 Bravos page, and it's a great
page.
You guys got to check that out.
It's funny.
It's good stuff, but that's the type of thing that you end up with. And, these kids cannot be going to their unit and feeling left out because they haven't been to combat. Anybody who's been in combat knows that you don't want to be in combat. But if you've done it, then wearing the patch means you know what it's like to be out of your country and to be serving in someone else's country. You know what it's like for things to suck. Having that combat action badge means you know what it's like to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and to have somebody shooting at you. Those people are to be tagged with those things, not as awards. Those are not awards. They're badges and they're patches. They tell other people, this guy's got knowledge that I don't have. I might want to ask him some questions and try to learn from his experience. It's not an award. Bring it. Yeah, I've talked a lot. Go ahead.
I just had a thought that occurred to me. We've all heard the adage that, and I can't recall who it was that said it, but wisdom is not the gaining of knowledge, but the shedding of ignorance. And the reason why I bring that up is because what about something like this? What if you started day one in boot camp with, I don't know, I don't know anything about uniforms or any of that stuff. What if you started with several patches? You started with those things. And as you learn more things, those things were actually taken away because you were shedding your old self in a symbolic sort of way until you didn't have any of those patches anymore, and that's when you were ready to move on to your real job. What if they approached it that way? Instead of gaining something, you're shedding something. You're getting rid of bad ideas or you know what I'm saying. Maybe not a good example, but
that does happen in boot camp. When you join, one of the first things that you do is you give up your civilian clothes, you give up your hair, you give up your individuality, you give up different things that you had as a civilian and now you don't have as an integral part of a unit, a larger piece of the pie.
Well, what do you think of this idea of in place of people gaining patches up through the whole basic training part? I'm not talking about after that, when you do actually accomplish things and gain things, but up until that point where you're able to do that, you start with some, say, stripes or something, obviously not officer stuff, but some kind of way of indicating that you're trying to get those things off of you. That's what your goal is throughout boot camp. Is that a better way maybe of signifying what it is the purpose is?
And it's actually counter to what the mindset in the military is. Like John's pointed out, you're stripped of all your ideas, all your individuality, and then they're building you up into something else. So getting rid of things would be the counter to that idea.
Well, boot camp is the process of doing that, though, still. I'm only talking about through boot camp. I'm not talking about afterwards.
What you're talking about is taking a kid, stripping him of everything, and then giving him something else without telling him what those things mean. And all he knows is that he's got all this stuff on him. And then you're going to take those little things away from him. I don't understand the purpose.
It's a reverse psychology sort of attempt here, I guess is what I'm saying, that they're significant of what you need to get rid of in order to make room for what you need to learn. I guess I'm trying to come up with an alternative to gaining patches in the same way that you would by going into combat or what have you. A reverse of that notion, because you just were making the argument that that doesn't seem appropriate to you, other than to identify, like Al said, to people that you come across throughout your military experience so that they know where you stand in that, not only hierarchy, but just general knowledge and information. I'm just trying to find an alternative. Rather than say it's wrong, what's a way to fix it?
Well, I don't think it needs to be fixed. I think the old school form of boot camp, you know what? I was one of the last booters to go through in the Navy when they could still take you out to the woodshed and beat you up. You know, that there was still wall-to-wall counseling, so to speak, when I first joined. And I felt cheated when that was outlawed. Not because I experienced it, but because I feared it. So when I was going through boot camp, I was afraid that if I did things wrong in a certain way, that I was going to get beat the hell up. And I didn't want that to happen. So I acted right. There was a consequence to acting up. So in the absence of that, I was asking myself, okay, well, if they can't take them out to the woodshed anymore, what's stopping a kid from talking shit to a drill sergeant? What's stopping a kid from being himself, from being a civilian? Even in boot camp, there's really no fear of reprisal. There's no fear of punishment going on there.
And there's also the other side of that. Nowadays, they do what's called paperwork, a paper chain, Article 15s. That shit can follow your entire career and ruin it. Even a false accusation of sexual harassment, a Sharps violation, will follow you your entire fucking career. Whereas the old school ways, even back in, older school ways, where your drill sergeant pulls you aside or your section chief pulls you aside and beats the fuck out of you because you really screwed up that could have cost somebody their life, as opposed to giving you paperwork. Yeah, you catch a beating, but you're fine later, as opposed to paperwork that's going to follow you and wreck your entire career. That seems kind of stupid to me, to do what they're doing today versus what they used to do.
I can see that.
But anyway, so we've covered this fucking topic to death. And we've almost run it an entire hour, I think.
We have.
Do we want to go into the other topic, or do we want to just have this one topic for the show?
I think this has gone long enough, man. Let's save it for the next one.
Yeah, I think so too. Do we have that? And I want to see if we have any closing arguments or things that we'd like to say to anyone who might be thinking about going into the military or is in the military and might be struggling with this too on some level.
Let's say, okay, Joel, you claim to have the least experience about the military. Why don't you start on that one with closing comments?
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. That way we can end with some actual information.
About that, but
yeah, well, we'll see. I do think that we've talked about this ad nauseum, about this culture war that we're having between sort of the old guard that values really, truly earning things in this life, and the new guard that says you get to start with everything. The world is your oyster, And if that ever changes, that's not your fault. That's society's fault. That's somebody else's fault, but not yours. Lack of ownership for your own behaviors. And when I say ownership, I mean the benefits too. You don't get the benefits of having ownership over your own life, because I can't think of very many things that are more empowering than succeeding on one's own merit and one's own stick-to-itiveness and just gall to get through it. And I really feel like much of our newer generations are not getting everything out of life that is out there. And maybe that's just my thinking, and maybe that's just an old school way of evaluating what is a successful life. But I almost feel pity for the kids, because again, they don't know. They're not being taught. I can't expect them to somehow find this within themselves when no one's leading them in that direction, or even giving them hints as to that might be out there. So it really makes me want to just plead with the breeders, of which I'm not, to toughen your kids up a little bit. Let them know that, yeah, you lost the game today. Don't you want to work hard and win the game tomorrow?
Sprinkles are for winners.
Yes, sprinkles are for winners. I'd like to end my rant on that.
Al, what do you got for closing comments?
Well, gosh,
Nothing sexist. I mean, you've already done enough of that, I think.
Fuck you. God damn it, Joel.
I don't know what's worse, sexism or racism, but Jesus, Al.
Well,
sorry, we've had like no comic relief for this entire show.
No, we haven't. So
None.
I'm gonna have to edit. I'm gonna have to edit it so that it comes out that way.
Yeah.
I think I've pretty much said everything I need to say in this episode. I've kind of talked it to death. I think I wouldn't discourage people from joining the military at this point, because I do feel there are some valuable lessons that are learned there, some friendships and some brotherhood that develops there that you'll never find anywhere else. It creates lifelong friends through hardship and through a mutual understanding of this shit sucks. But I would say, if somebody's planning on joining the military, research the shit out of all the branches, talk to all the recruiters, have family and friends that are going to give you objective viewpoints.
Be skeptical of the recruiters, right?
Input, yeah. And that was actually going to be my follow-up.
Okay.
Recruiters are going to lie to you like a motherfucker. They're going to lie and lie and lie just to get you to join. So don't believe half of what you hear and 3/4 of what you see. It's all fucking smoke and mirrors. But if you find a branch that has the job that you want, training that you want, think about a life outside the military. What are you going to do after? And get training in that while you're there. And I think
maybe
that's
offline. I've always had some curiosities about how much say you do have in jobs and stuff in the military. I don't really know. I've heard horror stories, of course. I don't know how much.
Offline, I'll tell you something about that.
Okay.
All right. What about you, John? What input do you have for people that are considering the military and all that?
I never wore the patch, but I worked in a recruiter's office for several months, and I can tell you, yeah, you're absolutely right. They are liars. Their whole point is to recruit. That means telling people what they want to hear in order to get them to do what you need them to do.
That's not the definition of recruit, though. I just want to be clear about that. Lying is not the definition of recruiting, in my opinion. But go ahead.
Well, even corporate recruiters are going to do that. They're going to tell you what you want to hear in order to get you in. Once you're in, then it's either going to suck or you're going to get what you want.
Those don't have to be lies. Telling people what they want to hear doesn't have to be a lie.
Well, no, of course it doesn't have to be a lie, but more often than not, it is going to be a lie.
Yeah.
For example, these are closing comments. Basically, when I hear that a kid wants to join the military, from my perspective, I'm not going to be the recruiter. I'm going to be the anti-recruiter. I'm going to tell them all the bad shit that's happened. I'm going to tell them about how much it's going to suck. I'm going to tell them about how they're not going to eat for 1 or 2 meals, or all they're going to have to eat is something that they know is going to give them colon cancer later on in their life, and they're going to have to eat it anyway because it's the only food that's there. I'm going to tell them the bad stuff. I'm going to tell them how awful a dead body or a burning body smells, what death looks like, what death feels like, what they are being trained to do, because it is a difficult job and it is going to require them to be very resilient. I'm going to do that because that makes me the anti-recruiter. If that kid still wants to join after all the crap that I just got finished telling him, how much he's going to be abused by the American people, how much he's going to be abused by his government, how much he's just going to be a tool of the Republic, and nobody's really honestly going to care about him. They're going to pay him lip service. They're going to tell him what he wants to hear. They're going to, thank you for your service. No, I'm sorry. It's lip service. They don't know what you went through. They don't know what you're doing, what you're going through. Buying you a meal is awesome. That's nice. That's great. But you're already getting compensation from the government. It's lip service. Even in their minds, they may be looking at you and saying, that guy's a hero. But they're going to forget about you 15 minutes from now. That life sucks. Being in the military sucks. I'm going to tell you about it. And if you still want to join, now I'm going to help you. Now I'll help you train up. I'll help you learn. I'll help you be the best soldier that you can be. But if you're not fully dedicated to living that lifestyle, you got no business doing it. It is a voluntary army. We are not being drafted. If you're going to volunteer for it, do it because it's difficult. Do it because you want to serve people, not because you're expecting some kind of reward. Do it because despite how awful things are going to be, you're still doing something for the right reason.
And when you're in, you find guys like John who will take their time to show you other jobs, other information, whatever they have. A lot of the times you can go up to anybody, and I know John personally with this, would take his time out of his day to show me shit, to show me how things got done. And that's a viewpoint you won't even find in corporate worlds.
No,
most won't tell you how to do their job.
No, in the corporate world, you're in competition with that guy. He's not going to help you learn anything. He's going to do everything he can to snipe you. In the military, arguably, of course, there are some people who still have that opinion, but in the military, it really is a mentorship type of environment where a sergeant is supposed to mentor the lower ranks, a senior sergeant mentoring the lower ranks. The same thing with the officers, although the officers do have a tendency to be a lot more, I'm putting some stress on the word a lot, they do have a lot more competition going on, but there's still a mentorship environment going on. Something that you only find in the corporate environment when somebody cares enough to do that. The comparison is very different, but yes, thank you, Al, for the vote of confidence. I appreciate that.
Oh, I appreciate all the time you took. You spent hours with my dumb ass, so I appreciate that.
You're a lot smarter than some.
Thanks.
I'm definitely not a racist.
Thank you for the vote of confidence there, Joel.
Lip service or not, I do appreciate everyone who has served on behalf of, all of Americans, and I thank you guys too.
Thank you.
I really mean that.
Just for the record, I'm not talking about personal friends. I'm talking about the guy at Burger King.
Yeah, I totally understand the distinction. I can see it in someone's eyes when it's just automaton bullshit,
Oh.
This is a compulsory sort of thing to say,
Yeah,
And
exactly.
speaking of military and speaking of Burger King, if you've ever smelled a dead body and you can still go into a Burger King, you are a stronger man than I, because it makes me want to puke every time.
I have a little bit of reference to that because we have to do cauterization, and so you can get a big old whiff of human smoke, man. It's
It smells a lot like their fucking burgers, their flame grilled burgers.
It smells kind of like pork, like burnt pork to me, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how. It's not a describable thing.
Al, well, yeah, okay, yeah. Be sure to outtake that, please, Al.
Okay. Yeah, and we won't discuss how formaldehyde, affects your taste buds for 3 days. just saying.
Oh boy.
When Joel, it is an urban legend that they put saltpeter in the food. They do not do that, to the best of my knowledge.
Well, I'll tell you what. It can't be any worse than the hospital chili I had for lunch today.
Hey, hospital chili's better than Wendy's chili. You don't know what's in that shit. Trust me.
You had tips of fingers and stuff.
Oh, shit.
Why do we have
Alrighty.
1.2 pounds of onions when I only had 1 pound of onions I was cutting up?
Wood pulp.
Okay, I'm totally done.
Don't think